And welcome back, everyone, to Thunderdome Metal Reviews, your church of heavy metal. I am the Reverend Dangerously. With me, as always, are the Dr. David Pizzo, Tracy, the Chicken Slaughter, Newport, and Gabe, Motor Basement Cooper. Gentlemen, welcome to the Facelift. How are you all doing?
Better than Lane, man.
Well, I hope.
Yeah. All right.
Love, hate, love.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I can't believe what the man in the box is sitting there either. Damn it. Should have gone with that one.
I was gonna go with that, but anyway. Yeah, man. I'm about to get my face lifted by this record.
Yes, indeed.
I don't even know.
For those of you who are unaware, we are talking about Alice in Chains' debut studio album, Facelift, released on 8/21 of 1990, recorded at London Bridge Studios in Seattle and Capitol in Hollywood, released on Columbia, and produced by Dave Jordan with a runtime of 54 minutes and 2 seconds. The band was Lane Staley on lead vocals, Jerry Cantrell guitar backing vocals, Talkbox on Man in the Box, Mike Starr on bass backing vocals on Confusion, Sean Kinney drums, percussion, and additional backing vocals, and he played piano on Sea of Sorrow. And they did have Kevin Schuss come in and add some additional backing vocals. So this is one of the deep magics that I've been on the ride with since it came out. And I suspect that, David, you're probably very similar to that.
Same.
Yeah.
Moment one.
Yeah. So Gabe, Tracy, I'm sure this was not your first listen of this album, but as people who have not been with it since inception, like David and I, what did you think?
I just want to say in my defense, I would have been 2 at the time the album was released, so it's hard to be with it since
Age is nothing but a number, Tracy.
Yeah, 2. That's it. Yeah, not with that attitude.
Yeah. Well, unless your parents were heavily into it. Now, I have a friend who was been with this album since inception, and he was 1 when it came out because his parents are metalheads, grunge kids.
You mean good parents?
That was my friend's parents. Mine, no, not this band. It wasn't gospel, so they didn't want to hear it. But I think my first introduction to Alice in Chains was I had a friend I worked with. I think he's actually your guys' age, and we were at the bowling alley, group of us from work. And he's like, we're going to hear this. And he put it on the jukebox. I was like, oh, wow. And now I was about 16, 17 at the time. And so I've been listening to him for the majority of my life, almost right at the majority of my life, but I haven't been with them since the beginning. No.
Well, I wasn't as young as Tracy was when this came out, but I don't think I heard Alice in Chains probably until maybe like 4 or 5 years after this album came out. And it was sort of by chance and probably through, alternative radio or, jukebox or something like that. So this was actually the first Alice in Chains record that I listened to all the way through ever before. But I was familiar with some of the singles off of this. That said, like I just never, had never really spent time with it. But yeah, it was a nice experience.
Yeah, I'm going to put my cards on the table kind of early on this. Of the big 4 Seattle bands, this is the one that I like the best because, frankly, it's the most metal of the 4.
It's the best one, period.
Yeah, I agree with that, too. Soundgarden has its moments. Their early stuff is actually pretty fucking metal. And then they get more into the alt-rock grunge thing later on. But this was, this is one of those things I didn't really, looking back on it, I think it feels more groundbreaking than it did at the time, and that might just be a product of age because the vocal harmonies on this are so good.
They are. They defined how a lot of new metal and other music I like sounded for the rest of the decade.
Yeah.
Right. That sort of layered harmony thing and the nasally thing. I want to point out this is a full year at least before Nevermind. Now I know they'd all been in the same scene, but I came to this because of MTV. This is one of those like, oh, look at this crazy ass video with a guy with his eyes sewn shut.
Yeah.
Headbanger's Ball or whatever.
Yeah.
I had a renaissance with this actually right before the pandemic. Like the summer of 19, I listened to the shit out of this album, and I don't know why. It just was that was the vibe, and end of the before time, I guess.
Mhm.
So coming back to it now was like, oh, you again, Facelift. I listened to Dirt probably even more than this. I have to admit, I probably
I
like
did too.
Dirt maybe a little better, but this album is so fucking good. And none of them are dead yet of alcohol or drugs, like, or half dead or 3/4 dead. Like some of that later work, it takes its toll. We're talking about that a lot tonight, I guess.
Yeah.
The lifestyle.
Well, this definitely was a lifestyle thing because I mean, this band really kind of, and I guess they all did, but this one specifically, they paid their dues by going on a tour with Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax. And even though I just said that I thought they were the most metal of them, they are not thrash. And so they got their fair share of abuse on that tour, at least initially.
Yeah, I read about that. That's interesting, sort of being the grunge kid on the metal tour. It's also interesting because, like, you know, at least the first rock music that I started came into on my own was grunge and not metal, because I'm just of a different generation. And I was definitely drawn to Nirvana, and I also was pretty heavily drawn to Soundgarden. So Super Unknown was a really big record for me. And I think that you could also make a case for, like, what kind of is attractive about Soundgarden and Alice in Chains is primarily, I would say, first and foremost, the singing. Like,
Yes,
I think
I agree.
the vocals are just like out of this world. And the best part of this album, you know, for me, so that just that distinctive quality of the voice, I would say that, you know, Nirvana doesn't have that. You know, they have something else.
I agree with that.
And you might argue that, I mean, some people are just huge into Pearl Jam and they would, you know, say that it's the same for, you know, with Eddie Vedder, but I don't, I'm just not sure it's the same quality. I mean, I was also pretty into Pearl Jam 10 when it came out, not so much anymore. I also don't think it's the same as what Chris Cornell does or even what Lane Staley does.
I don't know that we will ever go in depth on any of the other stuff. I could see us doing Soundgarden, but I don't know that we would ever do Nirvana or Pearl Jam on here.
Yeah.
So I'll just go ahead and say this, that I thought 10 was the best debut album of all three of them, or all four of them, excuse me. Because that is damn near a perfect album, track to track to track to track. But man, they kind of went off a cliff after that, and part of that is just boho, you know, Eddie Vedder doing Eddie Vedder things, and you know, fighting with Ticketmaster, which I supported, and all this other stuff. So there is so much difference. I mean, you can really tell that we talk about new wave of British heavy metal being a marketing term, and in some ways thrash being a marketing term. But I kind of felt that way about grunge too, because I don't think that it definitely wasn't being called grunge at this point.
No, it
that
wasn't.
doesn't happen until
Right.
after the Nirvana explosion.
I want to give a shout out to Mad Season. Do you remember that shit?
I do.
Which was
Yep.
Lane Staley with Mike McGready. That was tight. That was like,
It was.
well, Temple of the Dog was like that too, right? Like the
That was a
scene
tribute
was
to Mother Love
slicing and dicing and mixing up. So as a scene, it was incredibly generative. I have to say that. However, one wants to rank those respective bands, that's an intense output. That's like Orlando in the early '90s death metal grade output of bands for one mid-sized American market. It's intense, and it had a huge effect on. I mean, before you knew it, of course, you know, sometimes Pilots was happening, like all the spin-offs.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think they were not metal enough for metalheads, and not alt rock enough for what grunge became pretty quickly. I think they were caught between a little bit. Kind of like what I've said about you and I have said this about Clutch before, Ben.
Yeah.
Like too blues rocky for metal, really hardcore metal people necessarily, but then like for it to break into the mainstream, it's too metal. Like it's too heavy.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. And it goes back to something I wanted to say about the music, which is that in terms of grunge, this is pretty cool stuff, but it's sort of at a lower intensity than what I'm usually drawn to about grunge or like in grunge music. And part of it is that slow tempo. You know, you find plenty of grunge music that's like a little bit slower, but it also is it tends to be sort of driving. This has the bluesy aspect to it. It's bluesy as fuck, and it's also got this, like, you know, on the road to, you know, Black Sabbath slowness.
Mhm. it's got that
Go ahead, Tracy.
chugginess. I was gonna say it's got that
Yeah.
chugginess that you typically don't associate with. I think I'm not as familiar with the other three bands as you guys are. So like I'm kind of having that void in the hole. Like I know what you guys are talking about, but I don't quite have the same connections to them as you guys do. And so like Alice in Chains has that chugginess to it that I don't think any of the other three Seattle bands you guys are talking about have to it. That it's just it's like you can almost like feel the drop D in the way this album's produced and layered and mixed.
It's a bit of a Soundgarden, as I guess.
Yeah,
Gabe said.
Soundgarden has it for sure.
They do that too.
Yeah.
Pearl Jam less, and was it Blind Melon? Is that the other one? Nirvana. But also, isn't Blind Melon's that scene too?
Blind Melon. Was it?
I think so. I think they're Seattle too.
Maybe Shannon Hoon, who's a singer, was from the same place in Indiana that Axl Rose was from. But that doesn't mean that Blind Melon wasn't from the Seattle scene.
They're from LA. I mean, they're from Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and Indiana, but they formed in LA.
Okay, so they were an LA band.
Who among us is not formed in LA?
Yeah.
This is bluesy as fuck.
Whether we've been there or not. No, this is, you can definitely tell. This had, I think blues is appropriate. I would also say this has a touch more of country to it.
Yes.
Than especially than the other core groups did. Although if you listen to Nirvana's Unplugged album, and we're like really far afield at this point, we're just kind of tangentially around, but there's a lot of like old blues country feel to that, which is probably why that one's my favorite of the Nirvana stuff. But back to this, I think that you're right that this isn't necessarily as metal as most things as an album, but some of the tracks that were released off of this as singles were as metal as anything else that came out in '90. Really, I mean, Man in a Box, holy God, that is like super metal, not to start talking about tracks. But when this band wanted to, it could definitely tap into that vein. And to your point about the chugginess, Tracy, Jerry Cantrell is a fantastic guitarist. And this was a band that was not afraid to layer the shit out of stuff. Whether it was vocals for harmonies, putting reverb on the vocals, slight echoes, or just multiple guitar tracks to really make it super chunky. But if no one has anything else, we will move on to tracks.
I actually wanted to talk just a little bit about the drumming because the drummer claims that he had a broken arm or something when he was recording this thing.
Shit.
And the drumming in particular kind of lacks intensity, and so I kind of believe it that he wasn't at full throttle. And that's one of the only, I would say, like one of the weak points there is like it just sounds kind of toned down.
Yeah.
But the guitars are absolutely fantastic.
But on that note of drum, though, I think it adds a bit to it because you don't have this over the top production like a sound of drums coming in where it's like, here's your normal bridge, and then here's a fill. Here's a bridge fill. It's pretty much very set in the way it comes across, and I think it actually helps out a lot in the songs as they come out. That it's kind of more
it's definitely
toned down.
Focused like on, the vocals are way up front where they should be. The guitars are way up front where they should be. I just think they lack intensity. It's not necessarily the volume or the sonic space. Yeah.
I'll put it this way. I have never thought about the drumming on this album, even when I listened to it to review it. So
that's because your band doesn't have 9 people, 4 of whom are clowns and 6 of whom are percussionists. So
for sure, yeah.
It happens. It happens to the best of us. So,
and it's also not Gene Hoglan or Pete Sandoval.
Exactly.
Exactly. It was enough for the album, but it wasn't detrimental. It wasn't pulling away from the rest of the album.
Well, it's like Gabe said. This is a band that knew that its weapon was the vocalists or the vocals because it's Lane and Jerry's harmonizing. So yeah, you put those in the front of the mix. So kudos to you, producer guy whose name I already forgot.
Jordan something. Good old Jordan something.
Yeah, good old that guy.
You muted yourself, Ben.
I muted myself instead of skipping ahead. Tracks. I think We Die Young is a good opener, but really, Man in the Box is where they kind of knock you down. Sea of Sorrow I also think is good. Leave the Freak. I do think that there is some filler, and actually a substantial amount of more filler than I remembered from listening to this back in the day on this. But, Love, Hate, Love is good. Put You Down, Confusion, Real Thing. So roughly half the album I think is pretty good.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. I think about rough. The album's really good, and the hits are kind of sprinkled in. It's not front loaded to where you skip the back half of the album. There's still a couple of good ones in there, like Sunshine, Real Thing, Love, Hate, Love. Just a couple you didn't mention, but even the songs that aren't like stand out, they're still solid. I would almost even go. I think it's just how good the tracks that are standout are compared to the rest of them that makes it feel like the rest are filler when a lot of these are B grade already on their own right.
Okay. Well, I think that We Die Young is a fine opener, and Man in the Box is just fantastic. I also agree that there is a bit of filler on here. I did like Bleed the Freak. Sea of Sorrow is pretty good. I don't find the lyrics to be all that great. I love Hate, Love. I think it's really fun. Sunshine has fantastic melodies and the vocals and guitar. I like Confusion. I think the album ends kind of generically with those sort of bluesy numbers. Like they could do more to kind of, I don't know, showcase their uniqueness in terms of their style. But that said, it's not bad at all. It didn't, put me off from listening through it.
I muted myself ages ago. I don't have a whole lot to add. I don't know. Well, I don't know if I would say any of these tracks are filler, but some are certainly weaker than others. I'll give a shout out to I Can't Remember. That song's badass. I don't think any of you mentioned it. Sunshine is just so haunting, and I think that is very evocative of what's happening by the time you get to Dirt. Like they really lead into the cathedral haunt, cavernous sadness thing in a way that does, I think, what Gabe wanted them to do here, but they don't quite do it. But you know how I feel about death and roll. You know how I like the blues coming into my music. So I stand for this album now and forever. I like this album a lot. I think it's their second best.
Wow. All right. I guess we'll go into grading. I'll go first. What I was going to say is I don't think it's their second best. I think that perhaps, and I try not to do this, my grade might be slightly impacted by I know what they turn into, and I think we see glimpses of it here. And also, shout out to them. And the recording industry in 1990 is so different from how it is now that it's almost impossible to really correlate it. But to have your first debut album come out on Columbia, not a subsidiary, but the major label. Anyway, I think this is a good album. I'm going to give it a B. The Man in the Box is an all-time classic song. There are other good songs on there, but there is, in my mind, some filler tracks. So, and honestly, the heights that they will reach in subsequent albums really just kind of leaves this one not being as good as I remembered it being back in the day.
This is probably my third favorite album by them. I'm gonna come in slightly higher than Ben and give it a B plus. I'm not gonna what they become against them on this album.
I'm with Tracy. I don't, this is really the first one that I've invested any time in whatsoever, but I think it's excellent. Even if there are some things on it that I think are kind of forgettable, the good spots are pretty darn good, and I wouldn't trade those.
I wouldn't trade any of it, and I'm gonna fuck it up like I did last week with Pretty Hate Machine. And I think it's about as good as that album. That's the thing. I'm not going to penalize them for what they do later. I'm like, well, is it just because Pretty Hate Machine? Yeah. So I'm going to give it a 93 as well. I'm going to mess your spread up, Tracy. I like
That's
Southern
what
a lot.
you're
It's
good at.
fantastic. Yeah.
So that gives us a Thunderdome aggregate at an 89.
Sure.
Very solid. All right, my friend. What
Nice.
are we doing next time?
Next, we are looking at another album from 1990, I believe, in Judas Priest Painkiller.
Hell yeah, we are.
The
You're
second cover,
welcome.
y'all.
Yeah, I know. And on iTunes, if you look it up now, it moves. It's animated.
Mhm.
Like
Oh,
the
that's
blade
the
is
best.
spinning and shit. I'm like,
Yeah.
what the hell?
It does it on Spotify too, and
It threw me.
it puts the title track at the bottom of the picture as well, and all of them.
Yeah, it's epic.
Well, I believe, Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, because my memory is shit. This might be only the second time that we've ventured into Judas Priest.
It is the second time because we did British Steel previously. We haven't
Yeah.
done any other yet.
Well, that might have to change. But anyway, thank you for tuning in and hanging out with us for however long it took to review that Alice in Chains album. We appreciate it. We appreciate you, and catch us again next time on the Metal Reviews.